This video is brought to you by Private Internet Access. Unless you're living under a rock, you have probably at least heard about Project 2025.
Project 2025.
Project 2025.
Project 2025.
Project 2025.
Project 2025.
But what exactly is it? Is it actually a Republican plan to overthrow American democracy and establish a fascist dictatorship with unchecked power? Or is it simply a policy wish list by random conservative organizations that's been turned into an overhyped conspiracy by paranoid Democrats desperately trying to link this document to Donald Trump? Well, this last week, while I was sick in bed nursing a cold, I decided to read the entire thing, because I either vehemently hate myself or I love torture. Probably the latter. Now, I often hear people blow things out of proportion, and I'm usually the one in my friend group telling people that no, the sky is not falling, and things aren't as bad as they think that they are. But after reading Project 2025, I've gotta say, it is way worse than you think it is. This 900-page document is a joint effort by 54 influential conservative organizations, 36 authors/editors, 25 of them are officials from Trump's own administration, and 276 contributors to plan a complete MAGA takeover of the USA. At least 140 of Trump's own staff, including nearly half of his cabinet secretaries, have direct involvement with the project. But what is Project 2025? In its opening pages, it refers to itself as a unified effort by the conservative movement, a plan of action to go into effect the second that the next conservative president is sworn into office. And their goal is to assemble an army of aligned, vetted, trained, and prepared conservatives to go to work on day one to deconstruct the administrative state, to give Trump unfettered power to tear down America and rebuild a Christian nationalist dictatorship in its place.
Christians, get out and vote. Just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed, it'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You gotta get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not gonna have to vote.
But how will they accomplish this? Well, they plan to stack Trump's staff and cabinet with MAGA loyalists, firing massive numbers of civil servants, and by consolidating executive power in the hands of Trump, making the Department of Justice and the FBI directly accountable to the president, allowing him to weaponize them, and it would remove their capacity to act independently. This would basically remove very essential checks and balances against presidential abuse of power.
What Project 2025 articulates is the idea that the president should be the one directing the activities of the Department of Justice, even if that means that the president will not be investigated or that the DOJ will be sent to attack the president's political enemies.
We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
And by reinstating an executive order called Schedule F, the president would be able to replace any nonpartisan civil servants at will with loyalist cronies who will do his bidding and won't challenge him. And remember, Trump already stacked the Supreme Court with justices who've already demonstrated that their loyalty lies not with the American people or with the US Constitution, but with him and his agenda, ruling that the president is essentially above the law. In his last term, he demonstrated that he would fire anyone who dared to question his agenda.
You're fired. Get out of here.
And he viciously turned on any Republican who followed their conscience rather than the MAGA party line. The result? Almost all of them lost their re-election bids or opted to resign or retire in the face of impossible uphill re-election battles without Trump's endorsement. And the remaining Republicans in Congress learned to fall in line or they'd get the boot. Once Trump gains absolute power, the Project 2025 plan goes on to outline his next steps, and it calls for the largest deportation of immigrants in American history, which would tear millions of families apart. And it straight up states that they intend to arrest immigrants anywhere in the US without warrant. I mean, this is straight up Gestapo level papers, please madness. Oh, and it also says that ICE will simply rely on the good judgment of officers in the field to avoid inappropriate situations. What could possibly go wrong? Page 60 calls for the reversal of progress made in the areas of racial and gender equality. And this plan would be a massive attack on women's reproductive freedoms as well, calling for abortion surveillance, reversing FDA approval for and attempting to ban MIFA mifepristone. You know, the pill that most women take when they don't want to give birth and would rather just miscarry when their first trimester fetus is the size of a brainless peanut? Project 2025 attempts to restrict women's reproductive rights at a national level through multiple initiatives, including defunding Planned Parenthood, cutting federal funding to pro-choice states, eliminating funding for pro-choice women's healthcare programs globally, and establishing a pro-life task force. Okay, so they want to ban all abortions, but they're at least in favor of contraception, right? I mean, the best way to lower abortion rates is to expand comprehensive evidence-based sex education.
Wrong.
Page 477 calls for the outright abolition of any approved evidence-based sex education curriculum. But as teen pregnancy rates skyrocket, at least they're going to step in and support new mothers, right?
Wrong.
Page 489 demands the government prioritize married men and women over any other family type. And pages 284 and 451 advocate for stripping support for single mothers. Because, you know, Jesus hated widows and would totally want unwed mothers to suffer. Oh, and now that some states are starting to classify abortions as murder, you'll be happy to learn that they're also planning to expand the death penalty. I wish I was making this up. Now, if all this talk of authoritarianism and government surveillance has you as concerned as I am, you just might want to start encrypting your internet traffic by using a virtual private network or VPN. Because browsing the internet without a VPN is like sending postcards in the mail. Anyone can read it. Now picture sealing that postcard in an envelope. That's what a VPN does for your online data. Private internet access encrypts your connection and hides your IP address, shielding you from internet service providers, network administrators, and best of all, government surveillance. Internet privacy isn't just about secrecy, it's about protecting your personal data and preserving your online freedom. With private internet access, you gain a secure and private gateway to the internet. I've personally been using private internet access since 2012, and as one of their 30 million downloads, let me tell you, there's a reason that it's so popular. It works on every major platform, one subscription protects an unlimited number of devices simultaneously, and it's both extremely easy to use and also fully customizable if you're technologically inclined. And they're one of the few VPNs that supports P2P file sharing. Their strict no logs policy means that they never record or store user data, a claim that's been proven multiple times in court and verified by a third-party Deloitte audit. If you're ready to take control of your online privacy, I've got a great deal for you. If you use my link in the video description, you'll get an incredible 83% discount on private internet access. That's only about $2 a month, and you'll receive 4 months completely free. So sign up today and take back your privacy. If you're wanting children but are having trouble, well, Project 2025 aims to make IVF fertility treatments more restrictive, and even aims to outright ban life-saving stem cell research. Because, you know, that little clump of cells that's left over from IVF is a soul in a petri dish, and every sperm is sacred. Project 2025 is dripping with Christian nationalist rhetoric, and repeatedly talks about Judeo-Christian values and restoring the family to one man and one woman. It paints members of the LGBT community as predators, calls for Trump to reinstate his ban on trans patriots serving in the military, and uses extreme fear-mongering against trans people by equating transgenderism with pornography that is invading our schools, before calling on the next conservative president to outlaw said pornography, imprisoning teachers and librarians over banned ideas. This crackdown on free speech is absolutely totalitarian in nature, outright prohibiting any school employee from even referring to a student by any name or pronoun that differs from the exact one that's printed on the student's birth certificate, even if the students ask them to. And it calls for the termination of anyone who even participates in a critical race theory or diversity, equality, and inclusion initiative. And it's not just the LGBT community that they see as a threat to the traditional family structure. Page 5 and 6 accuse social media platforms of fraying children's bonds with their parents and siblings, stating that federal policy cannot allow this industrial-scale child abuse to continue. And yet, oddly enough, it says nothing about Catholic priests. Now, the Heritage Foundation, the main organization behind this plan, knows that the better educated you are, the less likely you are to be religious or to support Christian nationalism / a theocratic government takeover, and the more likely you are to be open-minded and support a secular government and a pluralistic, tolerant society. So they've put measures in place to erode the education system in the US, including the dismantling of the Department of Education itself, stating federal education policy should be limited and ultimately the Federal Department of Education should be eliminated.
We should abolish
the Department of Education.
The plan promotes voucher programs to fund private religious schools and unregulated homeschool programs with taxpayer funds, which have little to no government oversight and often perpetuate young earth creationism, flat earth nonsense, and evolution denial. And leveling up its totalitarian rhetoric, it further states that any state, city, and counties, school boards, union bosses, principals, and teachers who simply disagree with this voucher proposal should be immediately cut off from federal funds. And in addition, free educational programs like NPR and PBS are to be stripped of their funding, because apparently their science and evidence-based educational programs didn't agree with extreme right-wing propaganda. And how can you indoctrinate an informed populace? Finally, student loan forgiveness programs / relief efforts are to be rolled back. So don't worry, you can continue paying your student loans for the rest of your life. Yay! In keeping with Republican traditions, Project 2025 is steeped in climate change denial. On page 368, it aims to roll back the progress made towards cutting carbon emissions. Page 418 aims to slash green legislation protecting the environment. There are plans to cut funding for clean renewable alternative fuels, and even calls for a whole government unwinding of the progress that Biden made in combating climate change, referring to it as climate fanaticism. Then again, who needs to worry about a runaway greenhouse effect destroying the only planet that we have when you're 80 years old and Jesus is coming back any minute now?
Jesus is coming.
Yo.
Which is why they're also disbanding the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. Is it just me, or does this feel a lot like when Trump dismissed the Obama administration's pandemic response team right before the COVID outbreak? Page 372 calls for reversing our internationally agreed on decades-long push for gradual nuclear disarmament by building back up a nuclear arsenal bigger and better than ever. Because returning to Cold War-level nuclear dick-measuring contests and an apocalyptic showdown of chicken is exactly what every American wants. Because what's better than being able to destroy the planet 100 times over? Being able to destroy the planet 1,000 times over. Who's ready for a game of duck and cover? Oh, and page 371 talks about how nuclear waste disposal should be privatized, because that doesn't sound like a disaster waiting to happen. But at least giant corporations and billionaires will be able to celebrate all of this deregulation. I mean, did I mention that they're planning to bring back child labor? Somebody's gotta work the coal mines.
Create 25 million jobs for our country over the next 10 years.
Or that they have plans to deregulate overtime pay rules and to implement steps that would massively cut Medicaid, stripping the poorest people in America of desperately needed medical care. Now, some of the statements in Project 2025 were laughably moronic. Like when they said that progressivism is both communism and fascism, and somehow all of that is lumped under the umbrella of socialism. Do they know what any of these words mean? And the ironic thing is that while it's clear that all of the authors of this document want to impose Christian nationalism, and they somehow manage to unite on almost every one of the above listed nightmare scenarios, there are a few places where they disagree on just how much Christian nationalism to implement, especially when biblical literalism conflicts with their ultra-capitalistic political beliefs. Like on page 489, where the authors are split over whether or not the government should use its power to get people to rest on the Sabbath by making businesses pay time and a half to employees who work on Sunday. And some of the other authors disagree, seeing that as an infringement on their right to exploit their workers. Other parts of the plan are terrifyingly ironic, like when they quote the founding father James Madison saying that the accumulation of all power, legislative, executive, and judiciary in the same hands, whether one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elected, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. But then on the very next page, they call for the president to have the boldness to bend and break the bureaucracy to his will. I could go on and on about this document, because on almost every page there is another nightmare scenario popping out at you. Sometimes overt, other times obscured in propagandistic rhetoric and blatant dog whistles. But make no mistake, this reads like a How to 1984 guidebook. And Trump knows that his plan is massively unpopular, which is why he's acting like he has no idea what it is or who's behind it. And yet, here's what he had to say about the document's primary architects, the Heritage Foundation.
This is a great group, and they're going to lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what our movement will do.
And even as Trump was playing the fool, his advisor Stephen Miller and his press secretary Caroline Leavitt were starring front and center in Project 2025's official recruitment videos promoting the project. Make no mistake, this is Trump's plan for America. I do not use the word fascism lightly, but this is the perfect roadmap to it. And the worst part is, if Trump wins, this isn't hyperbole. He very well could accomplish his dictatorial goal.
Under no circumstances, you are promising America tonight, you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one. We love this guy. He says, you're not going to be a dictator, are you? I said, no. Other than day one. After that, I'm not a dictator, okay?
He's already stacked the Supreme Court with loyalists who have already demonstrated that they have no regard for the Constitution. Now, I'm American, but I grew up as a missionary kid in a country that did not have free and fair elections, where an authoritarian ruler presided for life and then handed the reins over to his son. Dictators do not relinquish power. If Trump wins and is able to gain a foothold in the House and/or Senate, which are both very real possibilities, there will be absolutely nothing stopping him from establishing a dictatorship. So vote like your future depends on it, because if we don't win this one, this could be the last election that you ever vote in.
Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts appeared on Trump ally Steve Bannon's podcast, The War Room, earlier this month with a warning.
We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
Now, because of the sensitive nature of the content of this video, it's quite likely that YouTube will limit the reach and not promote it to as many people. So if you think that this topic is as important as I do, please share this far and wide and help it reach more people. Thank you so much for your ongoing support of my work. Don't forget to check out Private Internet Access. And as always, dare to be curious, but don't drink the Kool-Aid.
Ever heard of
Jesus.